The roaring engine of a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan drowned out the noise of the crowd in front of Buckingham Palace. Vincent Carlisle, an American tycoon who was called the King of Silicon Valley, stepped out of the passenger seat. He owned social networks, banks, and airlines. But most importantly, he owned power. His sunglasses flew off his face as he looked around the royal residence. In a world where everything can be bought, this building was just another symbol of an outdated tradition that needed to be updated. "Now let's see who's in charge," Vincent muttered and headed for the gate. His eyes stopped at the royal guardsman standing at the post. As unwavering as a stone statue, he did not even move his eyes when the billionaire approached him. "Do you even know who I am?" Vincent smiled. The guard remained silent. But Carlisle was not used to silence. Seconds later, a loud clunking sound rang through the air, a sound that made the crowd gasp. Vincent Carlisle had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The heat of London that day was unusual, forcing tourists to waive tour programs and children to grab cold bottles of water. There was a sea of people in front of Buckingham Palace. But they all instantly retreated when a Rolls-Royce Cullinan with blacked-out windows drove onto the square. Vincent Carlisle opened the door and got out of the car. He was in his early 40s, but at first glance he could be mistaken for a 30-year-old. Expensive grooming, a personal trainer, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in image enhancement had done their job. He adjusted the sleeves of his shirt, flashing a 300,000-pound Patek Philippe watch, and looked around the palace. "It's really nice," he said to his assistant, a young man named Nate, but a little dated, like all this showmanship. Nate nodded, but he looked concerned. "Vincent, there are strict protocols here. These guardsmen aren't just statues, they're what? They're guys in suits. Fake soldiers for tourists." Carlisle moved forward, his alligator shoes softly stepping on the cobblestones. The tourists standing nearby instinctively recoiled, feeling the aura of confidence emanating from him. A guard stood in front of him. His tall bearskin hat, red uniform, and perfect posture made him look like a monument. He was staring straight ahead. No movement, no reaction. Carlisle stopped in front of him. "My friend, I don't know what your name is, but I'm going to be blunt. You have the easiest job in the world. Stand still. Don't talk. That's it. Do you even get paid for that?" The guard didn't move. "I wonder," Carlisle turned his gaze to Nate, "why he doesn't even blink." Nate shrugged his shoulders. Carlisle smiled. "Look, he's not even responding to the conversation. What if?" And then Vincent did something that made the crowd freeze. He leaned forward and touched a button on the guardsman's uniform with his finger. "Is this thing real? Or is it for tourists?" The crowd gasped. Everyone knew the rule: don't touch the guardsman. The guardsman remained steadfast. But now there was a chilling threat in his eyes. Carlisle felt it. He took a step back. His smile grew even wider. "You must think I'm a complete idiot. But you know what? In my world, silence is a weakness." Vincent snapped his fingers in front of the guardsman's face. Zero reaction. Then he raised his hand and slapped the guard on the cheek. The sound of the slap resounded over the square like a clap of thunder. Some of the tourists screamed. A woman with a child looked away. Nate turned pale. Carlisle felt briefly satisfied. It was a victory. But then he saw the guard slowly, very slowly turn his head back, fixing a piercing gaze on him. And Vincent suddenly realized that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The air in front of Buckingham Palace became heavy, as if before a storm. Not a single sound broke the silence. Even the tourists, who had been laughing and chatting a minute ago, now stood staring at the guardsman. Vincent Carlisle felt a chill run down his spine. He was used to being a predator, used to people bowing their heads to him, or at least responding with a nervous smile. But this man in the red uniform, he was different. The guardsman turned his head slowly, and there was neither anger nor confusion in his eyes. Only the cold assessment with which experienced warriors analyze a threat. Threat. The word suddenly flashed through Vincent's mind, making his heart beat faster. "Vincent." Nate took a step back, clutching the tablet in his hands. But Carlisle dismissed his doubts. The crowd was watching. Smartphone cameras were rolling. To retreat now meant to lose face. "Well, soldier? You're still not going to talk." Vincent tried to keep his voice confident, but even he felt it cracking. The guardsman remained silent. But now his posture changed. It was barely noticeable, but it changed. Straightened shoulders, slightly different foot position. The crowd noticed it too. "Will he do something?" a woman whispered. "He can't. They're not allowed to react." But he hit him. Carlisle felt people's attention shift. From him. to the guardsman. He couldn't let that happen. All right, boy. Vincent took another step closer. I'm going to give you one last chance. Either you admit that you're just a decorative piece of furniture, or... He didn't have time to finish, because the next second the guardsman took a step forward. It was only one step, but it sounded louder than any words. The crowd gasped again. Vincent suddenly felt his heart leap into his throat. The guard no longer looked like a statue. He looked dangerous. Carlyle instantly took a step back, but it wasn't enough, because the guard took another step, and now his eyes, cold as steel blades, were boring right into Vincent. You. The guard spoke for the first time. His voice was low, calm, but with that menacing firmness that made people obey. You have just attacked a member of Her Majesty's military on duty. Vincent opened his mouth, but no words came out. The guardsman leaned a little closer. Do you understand what this means? The silence exploded with the voices of the crowd. He's going to be arrested. He really committed a crime. Look, the guards are coming. Carlyle looked around sharply. Indeed, the two royal officers were already walking through the crowd, making their way. Vincent felt as if his lungs were being squeezed. This can't be happening. This is just a game. It's just a play. But now the play is over, and all that was left was reality. Vincent Carlyle could not believe his eyes. The palace guards, burly men in dark blue uniforms, were moving toward him with a confident, inexorable stride. Their faces were impenetrable, like those of professional fighters, but the worst part was that they didn't even try to talk to him. They had already made up their minds. Vincent, Nate took another hesitant step back. We have to go? But where to? The crowd surrounded them in a tight ring. Smartphones were raised. Someone was even live-streaming. If he just turned around and left, a video of him retreating like a frightened schoolboy would be posted online. Vincent Carlyle does not retreat. This is ridiculous, he wheezed, raising his hands in a defiant gesture. I just touched this soldier, and now they want to arrest me? For what? You hit a soldier on duty, sir, one of the guards said as he approached. His voice was dry, official, almost indifferent. This is a serious offense. It was a joke. Carlyle's voice broke. It was an assault, the guard said, continuing to walk. Vincent felt panic begin to boil inside him. His life was all about control. He controlled the market, he controlled the shareholders, he controlled the people who worked for him. Anyone who contradicted him would eventually bend. But now, it was as if he had run into a wall, an unyielding wall, cold, ruthless. And if he doesn't take control of the situation right now, tomorrow his face will be all over the headlines. Billionaire arrested in front of Buckingham Palace. This would destroy his empire. He looked around quickly. People were filming, their faces full of expectation. They wanted a show. They wanted him to lose. But Carlyle was a businessman, and businessmen don't lose. He squared his shoulders, forced his heart to slow its frantic pace, and did what he did best. He spoke. Okay, gentlemen, let's not make a circus out of this. His voice sounded confident again, even a little dismissive. Let's just settle this like adults. He took out his phone. I have contacts in the government. I think I know people who can convince you that this is a misunderstanding. The guards didn't even look at his phone. They just kept walking. Vincent felt something break inside him. They were not playing by his rules. This was not a negotiation he could win. This was a sentence. His hands clenched into fists. And then the guardsman, the very man he had hit, spoke again. True power is not in who you can buy. His voice was flat, cold, as unyielding as his posture. True power is that even your punch didn't change anything. His eyes were calm, but Carlyle saw something in them that frightened him more than anything else. Complete indifference. This man did not even perceive him as a threat. It suddenly seemed to Vincent that he was standing in the center of the crowd not as a predator, but as a cornered animal. And at that moment, two guards grabbed his arms. Get your hands off me. Vincent Carlyle's voice cut through the air, but the crowd no longer responded. His cries were drowned in the whispers of tourists and the clicks of cameras. His hands were clenched by the strong fingers of the guards. Not roughly, not painfully, but with that calm, iron grip that left no room for maneuver. He had no control over the situation. Panic surged through his chest as Vincent realized he was being led away. Slowly, but inevitably. You have no idea what you're doing, he wheezed. The guards did not stop. They'll sue you. They'll destroy you. Sir, you have the right to remain silent, one of them said dryly. The right to remain silent. It sounded like a sentence. Carlyle looked around again, trying to find some way out. His eyes darted to Nate, but he stood aside, clutching his tablet to his chest, as if he hoped he wouldn't be noticed. Vincent felt sick. The whole world was watching his fall live. Just yesterday, he was running a multi-billion-dollar empire. And now, he suddenly realized that when they put him in the car, everything would be over. It had to be stopped right now. He tensed his muscles sharply, trying to break free. But it was the worst mistake he ever made. Because at the same second, he heard the command, "Stop resisting." He was twisted sharply but professionally. His expensive cashmere coat was slashed across his shoulders as his arms were snapped back. And oh, a scream escaped his throat, but it was too late. A thick plastic cuff slid around his wrists and closed. The crowd roared. The guards led him away. And now there was nothing he could do. Vincent Carlyle had lost. Tight plastic handcuffs pressed on his wrists. His expensive coat was slipping off his shoulders. The crowd was no longer whispering. Now they were filming, their faces filled with disbelief, delight, and triumph. The king of Silicon Valley had fallen. He was being led to a black Range Rover waiting at the entrance to the palace. He was desperately trying to regain control. "You don't know what you're doing. This is a political scandal. Do you really want to deal with my lawyers?" There was no response. The guards kept walking, methodically, professionally. They did not hear him. They were just doing their job. Just like the other guard. Carlyle glanced over his shoulder. The guard was standing there, just like before, without a word. But now his posture spoke louder than any threat. Vincent would like to believe that he had one. That he had at least made this man feel angry, hateful, or contemptuous. But he hadn't. The guardsman was unbreakable. Carlyle lowered his head. For the first time in his life, he had met a force he could not buy, intimidate, or break. The door of the Range Rover opened. "Get in, sir." Vincent paused for a second, as if considering something. Then he sat down. The door closed. The car moved. And a minute later, all that remained of Vincent Carlyle in front of Buckingham Palace were the traces of his expensive shoes on the pavement. And the guardsman continued to stand. Without a single movement. Without a single word. And yet it was he who said the most that day.